book jacket, which I thought was really cool that
Huh.
he did that. And I think it's worth reading because it's pretty detailed. And that was in a certain way, that was the most direct thing for me that relates to what we do at Audio Reader. So, but then anyway, I just wanted to show that. And then also, I just made a little list of the general themes, and I think I'm not going to talk about all these. I mean, I know we won't, but I think I'll just run through it because if any of you are thinking about reading the book, this might let you understand what's in it. So I have information about retinitis pigmentosa, which I didn't know much about, but I have a friend who has it. And actually, this is her copy of the book. And so don't let me do all the talking, okay? But I have things to say.
Which-
So as I was partway into the book, I realized, oh my gosh, this is what my friend Liz has. I wonder if she would like to read it. And I sent her a note about it, and I said, this might freak you out. On the other hand, it might be useful. And she got it and immediately wrote back to me and said, I have had nobody to talk to about this, and I have always felt many of the same things that he's going through, and has been so helpful, and I'm only partway in, and I'm just, it was fabulous for her. So that was pretty cool. And anyway, so he talks about that, and because the thing that's sort of interesting is this. Okay, so the first theme was information about retinitis pigmentosa. The second thing was his observations on the process of going blind. So he's not blind yet, or at least at the beginning of the book he wasn't. He was much more so by the end. But that kind of not quite there yet, and still hanging on to for quite a while. He didn't use the white cane. Actually, that's number 3, hiding it. Also being unaware of what other people see. So he lost his peripheral vision and didn't even, of course, know what was there. So that was the third thing. The fourth thing was strategies he used, mostly to hide his blindness. There's another book I read subsequently called Vision, written by a federal judge in D.C. Awesome book. And he did the same thing. Part of his book is about the strategies he used just to hide it so that it did not appear to be disabled. His frustrations, back to this book. He held off using the cane for a long time. And when he did start using it, he didn't know how to do it, and no one taught him. And I think, Jim and Trish, you might remember this. I think it was a couple of years before someone said, "You're doing it wrong," and and got him straightened out, and he said it made a big difference. Then the one big part was about the ACB, American Council for the Blind, and somebody else can correct me on that, if that's the name of the other one besides National Federation of the Blind, but what their general philosophical differences were, how interesting it was for him to go to conventions of all blind people, and what a freeing thing that was for him. The immersion program he did, which I think was ACB, where he wore a blackout mask so that he could really, really learn to be a blind person. And then how his family managed it. So anyway, those are kind of all the big general topics. Did I leave anything out? Did I talk too much? Probably.
No, I think you would clearly, a final exam for the course, you'd have gotten a much better grade than I would. So,
Do you have stuff to say about it, Jim? Go ahead and talk.
I think you covered most of the topics. It's kind of implied in one of the things, but I also tried to pick up on his relationship with other people trying to relate to him as a blind person. And I thought that was a fairly strong element in there also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I was an undergrad, one of my student jobs was I worked for the Student Assistance Center. Oops, leaning on my.
Oops.
I worked for the Student Assistance Center and as a reader for one person who was not blind but who had had brain damage, and the other person was mostly blind. And the person who was mostly blind and I read at Watson Library. And we would have to go to the reference desk and get the key every time. And so often, the reference librarian, who was a perfectly intelligent person and not a bad guy in any way, he would talk to me and say
Mhm.
things like, well, does he want to come this afternoon? Or, stuff like that. He's standing right here. He's right next to me.
Yeah.
And so that kind of, those things Andrew Leland also talks about.
Yes, and that's common to other situations also. I deal with people with developmental disabilities, and dealing with a physician, the physician will not talk to the person now. Instead of how are you feeling, the question is how is he feeling? You know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but I think we all do that. It's I think I also could sympathize with the people who are committing this error because it's terribly easy to do that. It, uh,
yeah,
just as people, of course, my children were precocious, so that goes without saying. But uh, frequently, you see that with adults dealing with children who are perfectly capable of speaking for themselves, but they'll speak to the parent rather than the child.
I'll throw in there one thing that I really appreciated about the way that he wrote the book was that I didn't feel like he was preaching to me. Sometimes you feel like you're getting scolded, which in a lot of cases, just as you said, Jim, your initial response is kind of that's the way someone responds until they learn and understand and have a different perspective. And when I was reading it, he was very honest about the fact that as he was, going blind, and then sometimes he talks about coming blind instead of that concept of going blind. It's more like he's entering into a new world. He's becoming blind. He's becoming something else, that transition. But as he talked about that, he shared how he had these biases that he didn't even realize he had, that he was experiencing things in the way we as sighted folk might experience it, because he was in that process. And so it was almost like he was taking us with him on that journey. And so you felt human in the reality of, gosh, I have made these horrible mistakes that now seem horrible when I look at it from a different perspective. But in the moment, I was just, doing that, whatever it might be, speaking to the sighted person or not acknowledging the other person or just not understanding the other perspective. So I appreciated that. I liked that I didn't feel like he was preaching to me or giving me a scolding, but instead he was just talking about how this is part of the reality of where we are, and let's acknowledge it and learn. Let's do something a little different. So I really like that.
yeah,
I'd say it's a tough thing to train out of people, and I'd like to offer a tiny bit of grace to the other person in that situation. Only in that the example that I'm thinking of is, let's say I was trying to sell a car to a pair of people, and one of them speaks perfect English, and the other one doesn't particularly speak well. But this is the one who's buying the car. I think I'm going to wind up talking to the person with whom I can converse more easily and wind up making that seem like that's the more dominant person in the situation. And at least in that case, I'm not trying to treat one person as less than and one person as more than. And sometimes it can be an honest mistake in that sense. But unfortunately, sometimes it also is, oh, this person is disabled in some way, and I see them as less than. And that's the way sometimes that it comes out. And unfortunately, it's hard for us to see the difference between the two situations.
I just had some other thought about this, but what the heck was it? It flitted out of my brain. Never mind.
Well, I can just share that I think there's been the way he talked about sort of what you're speaking to is that it's not your full identity. It's part of your identity, but at the same time, that was sort of a tension within the book. Is he talked about how blindness shouldn't be considered, a tragedy. It shouldn't be considered the only component of your personality, or your identity. But at the same time, it shouldn't be incidental either, right? Because it is a big part of your personality, or a big part of your life, and a big part of how you're experiencing the world. So I loved that paradox. I loved that concept of both, and putting it forward in a way that didn't just minimize it, or make it some sort of dichotomy that you can just say straight up and down, this is a binary of you're blind or you're sighted. Go ahead, Mary.
Oh, that is exactly the thing that just disappeared from my brain has come back, which is that I was really struck by him talking about how some very small percentage of people are absolutely blind, but if you're fully sighted, you have a tendency to think blind, not blind. But in fact, there's hardly anybody that has zero vision, and so that's a kind of that might be partly why. I mean, yeah. Although, yeah. But anyway, that's why we need to see it in terms of gradation, and generally people don't.
I I I was thinking along the lines where not the blindness it can be, is obviously an important segment, but I absolutely just thought a quote from Kim Morrow once just really struck me. She said she didn't really think of blind as a disability. She said mostly it's just kind of an inconvenience, and I thought that's a great way to view it. Uh, yeah,
Yeah, Kim's always very interesting too, because she always identifies as blind from birth, which I
yeah,
think it does
yeah,
have a different way of of explaining who you are to someone compared to someone who has low vision. And I think I just looked it up, it's something like 15% of blind people can't see anything, or are more of those blind from birth. And
right.
those are the ones who tend to be braille readers and use white canes. So I think it's really interesting what you're talking about, how he was hiding it for so long, and how long he used strategies to hide his condition.
Yeah,
Because I think there's a lot of that resistance to needing a white cane, because it's a really small percentage of blind people who actually use it for various reasons.
Mhm.
Um, Even though it can make their life so much better, it's just that resistance to feeling like you have to identify that way. So I don't know if you guys can, I didn't get to read the book, so I don't know if you can talk
I
more about how
yeah
he,
yeah I found myself along that line relating it to the four stages of whatever it is, starting with denial and anger, and I think those really came through in his narrative of what he was going through. Uh, and I think in the other book you mentioned, Mary, the judge, it was a long period of denial.
But longer than Andrew Leland by a lot,
Yeah, yeah,
because he didn't want to be seen as the blind judge.
right.
And
Particularly, I found myself wondering if he ever listened to I guess we're all old enough to remember Alice's Restaurant. Uh, and I wondered how he reacted to Blind Justice and the joking that was done in that song by Otto Guthrie. Uh, so, I wondered, would it make him mad, or would it make him just laugh, or what?
That concept you're talking about, Jim, I believe is the 5 stages of grief, is what they call
Yes,
it.
of grief. Yeah.
And as I read the book, and admittedly for me, it was several months ago, and I audio read it rather than reading it on paper, which unfortunately for me means that I don't absorb as much as I could. But I remember being struck sort of all the way through at various tones that I hit in the book at sort of the sense of tragedy that the book was, at least for me as a reader. The idea of I don't know, failure, I guess, the failure of your sight from the beginning to the end of the book, and how that is a tragedy of some sort. And being struck again by Martha's detail that only 15% of people that we consider blind are blind from birth. And, sort of the question that naturally pops into your mind of which one's worse. Would it be worse to be blind from birth? And then, is this a disability? I've never even had the thing that you're telling me I'm missing out on. Or would it be worse to have to go through literally years of knowing that this tragedy is going to befall you? And for some people, treating it like that. And I think at various points in the book, he was doing that. He was working through his own sense of, oh my God, this is a tragedy that's happening to me. Whereas I'm sure other people would be more sanguine and matter of fact about it, I would imagine, and they probably aren't writing books about that.
Yeah, that raises my one thing I remember where he kind of early on when he was diagnosed was kind of told what the progression was going to be like, and particularly that it was going to be a rapidly increasing slope as he aged, and then later found out, well, no, that's actually now we don't think that's true. And I wondered, so did he feel a relief, or did he feel, oh, now I've gone all this time suffering only to find out that it was not based on evidence? I thought that I was curious how that impacted him.
I think he was upset by it.
Yeah, I think he was.
Yeah.
I think he was
Because
upset
he
by
had-
the fact
he
that
had-
he was
Yeah,
he was
he had planned his
anticipating-
life. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah. I think he was anticipating a full blindness, right? There was a sense that, hey, I still have vision. It was kind of straddling both worlds, right? I'm not really blind, but I am blind, right? I'm not part of the sighted, really. I don't have that. And I'm also not the fully blind. I think that was this whole book. Trish, you mentioned it wasn't preaching. I think it was, and he even said it out front, it was more of a memoir of his own journey, right? Of his own acceptance, of his own discovery of what he thought blindness was going to be at the beginning, and ultimately of where he landed at the end of the book, right? A comfortableness that took the whole book to get there, right? Of what he was.
Yes.
And there was a kind of a betrayal by the doctors, I felt, because he wasn't going to be fully blind, right? Wait a minute, you're telling me I'm not going to be fully blind? I'm still going to have this? And even I felt a tinge of guilt as he was getting more and more involved in the blind society, that perhaps he's not really blind. You know what I mean? Of that way.
And I remember in reading the book, catching a little bit of him, the author, being angry with himself for being angry that he wasn't going to be losing his sight as fast as he was told.
Yeah. And I can, I can understand, I can understand that jumbled emotion of what should I feel about it? And sometimes your emotions are illogical, sometimes they're not, right? Sometimes you're just trying to work it the way out. I thought it was a beautiful journey into all of the uncertainties and the unknowns of blindness. I thought it was a brilliant book. I found it interesting of the background of all of it, and even some of the innovations on behalf of blindness that we all share because of, and we all are enriched by it. There's a quote that at the end I found to be remarkable, and if it's okay, I'll read it. It says, "The failure to appreciate this basic fact that someone's difference does nothing to alter their humanity is the wellspring of all discrimination, alienation, and oppression. It ought to be obvious, but if you're not disabled, it's stubbornly easy to forget." I thought that was remarkable and very true.
He did have the advantage of being a professional writer to begin with.
Yes,
Yeah.
that helps.
I'm glad you say that, because I'm with you, Steve. I really enjoyed the book in terms of it. I just felt it was a great book. I mean, whether or not I was reading it for our discussion or whether it's a great quality book. And I added that it's was nominated for the Pulitzer. I put that in the chat because I didn't realize that when I first started reading it. So definitely high quality, but it is from the perspective of somebody that has a lot of resources. And so I want to throw that out there, because I do think that a lot of our folks that we're reading to, that are our listeners, certainly come from that background and have some resources, but there's a significant chunk that don't. And so this is his experience and his memoir, and I love it. And it so broadened my perspective. But he does come from a place where he was able to, do this and had all of the capacity in order to do that. I mean, I was amazed. So, like I think it was his grandpa that wrote Brighton Beach Memoir, right?
Yeah, Neil Simon.
Neil Simon.
Yeah, go figure.
Like it took me a while. I was like, I think is that right? Wow.
It's in his family's blood. For me, the interesting thing for me as I read it, I kept having to check myself in all of it. And I can't remember who said it, maybe Jim or Michael, I can't remember. As I read it, and there were people describing how upon understanding that he was blind, that they would act differently. And he took that as a slight, as a prejudice, as a downgrade, right? As a commentary on his humanity. And I can't help but wonder, when I think about myself and how perhaps I have acted, if I looked at the past, there's a level of, for a sighted person engaging with someone who's blind, having never been blind myself, there's an uncomfortableness of how to relate to that person, right? How do they think of blindness? And I think all of that uncomfortableness comes out a lot of times, right? And in a manner of speaking that's different from just another schmo next to them. And suddenly they feel like, okay, they're treating me different now, right? And I can absolutely see their point of view. Oh, okay, now there's an awkwardness, and now perhaps they don't feel comfortable talking to me directly, like you would say the example, right? There's an uncomfortableness there. And I'm sure there's a lot of that, but I think I've done that too. But I think it's been mostly out of it's just such it is. I'm not blind. There's a foreignness about it that I don't know how to interact, and so my uncomfortableness rubs off. I know it does. So I think this book helped me immensely on having an inside track on the other side of you, that I think it will go tremendously far. I hope, I believe anyway. And should the next encounter, I think I'll be more comfortable now in encountering them and just getting past that, right? All of that uncomfortableness and just meeting them where they are. I certainly hope so. And if I know that I have in the past done that, and it hasn't been out of, at least I hope, I searched my heart, it hasn't been out of any prejudice. It's been out of just that, how do I communicate with this, which is silly. That's not like they've lost their brain, but you know what I mean? I think it's just helped me realize how I interact and do that self, introspection. And then I think also come to grips on how I can move forward with them in mind more. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, if I can offer, if you don't mind, just another spoonful of grace. And sorry, Mary, I don't want to sound like I'm talking over you. I think that interaction that you're talking about, say you meet someone who is blind for the first time and you begin to have a conversation with them, and there's an uncomfortableness, that any disability really. And the example that's immediately popping into my mind is, say you meet someone who has a stutter, and you need to speak to them back and forth. There is a broken communication right at the beginning, not necessarily because of the stutter, but because you don't know what accommodations are expected, hoped for, would be rejected. For example, if you're speaking to someone with a stutter, does that person want you to fill the empty space in the conversation that they can't fill because they can't create the words that quickly? Or do they want you to wait patiently for them to get out the thought that they have? And not knowing which one of those it is that's hoped for, you're afraid that you're going to step on their disability in some sense.
I love that the title of the next show that we're going to be doing up at the Coterie is called Just Ask. And I just love that. I mean, because I think what you're both talking about is that we kind of need some permission to do that. Like that it's okay to just ask. Like you know, what Steve was saying is that by seeing the perspective of the other person, at least through their eyes, through reading a memoir, right? We are somehow given that permission to just ask, you know, it's okay. Do you want me to wait while you're stuttering? You know, let me just ask you about that. You know, would it be better if I don't? Does it, you know, disrupt you when you're trying to get a word out? Do I just need to be quiet? You know?
And how much
Um,
better would we all be if we were comfortable to just ask right at
just
the
ask.
outset?
That's the title of the show. I don't know exactly. I'm so excited about it, Martha. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, I mean, just straight up, let's just ask. And I think the more we learn and the more we broaden our ability to be uncomfortable and step forward and ask and move forward with learning about this humanity of the person with us. Yeah, let's do that. Right. Anyway,
I'm
I
going to
think
add that it
Mary and
is
Martha
based
and
on a
maybe
book.
Deb wanted to say something. Go ahead. Martha, sorry.
Oh, Just Ask is based on a book actually written by Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
Oh,
Yep.
So
I guess I
it's
find
actually,
myself thinking, well, no matter what you do, each person is going to be unique and an individual. And so I thought I'm going to now write a book called I'm Sick of Being Asked.
you know, when my mother lived to be 93, and she was in pretty good health most of the time, but then later had to use a walker and stuff like that. And if anyone offered to help her, she would bite their head off.
Mm.
And it didn't matter how politely you did it or how sort of, you know, we're equals, I'm just politely, nope, she'd just bite your head off. So everybody has their way, right?
Right.
So,
Which is great too. I mean, I think some of the things that we learn from this is also that blindness is not just one perspective. You know,
right.
like that was. I know Martha has said that to me oftentimes. Just that, like when she goes to her events, encountering folks, they're all different types and all different perspectives and all different ways of approaching it. You know, some people want to be asked. Some people would bite your head off. You know, I mean, some people use a cane, some people don't. They think it's bad. You know, you can't use a cane. Why would you ever use a cane? So I think that's a beautiful wonder of, you know, our humanity, and good for us to recognize that. So yes, we might put ourselves out there if we ask. If it's Mary's mother, we might get our head bit off.
Right.
Deb, were you wanting to share something too? I saw you take yourself off mute. I just want to make sure I'm not. If not, that's okay too.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the comments have all just been excellent. I really, really liked the book. I thought it was very helpful, and the perspective of the family as well. The child, you know, kind of
Yes.
getting used to his
Yeah.
dad's blindness. But
Yeah.
one thing I found it very helpful. A lady in a book group that I belong to she's developing blindness, not from the retinitis pigmentosa. It's a different health issue, but trying to help her and, you know, keep her involved in the group and figure out, you know, how to help. And I think she has been one that doesn't really want to, you know, address it too much. So, you know, a little bit like Mary's mom, you know, she doesn't, but it's hard to know sometimes what to do, but this book was very helpful, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was good. I think that the other book that Mary mentioned uh, had it really doesn't deal that much with the blindness issue. Uh, it's got a lot of other really good things in it. But you're bringing up the family, because I was also interested in, we talk about how we might relate to someone who's blind, sort of the community, but there's also what happens within the family itself. And I think I found that very interesting in both books. I think in the judge's case, they had worked it out pretty early on that this was going to happen. I think they were dating, and he told her what the future brought, and they had to make a decision in terms of their relationship from that very early point. Also, does that come up in this book also? Am I mixing the two books?
No, it did come up, but not very much. And he just said, you know, I have an eye condition and I don't
Yeah,
see.
yeah.
I mean, he was very vague about it. And as I recall, and others of you who've read it might remember, that there came a time, I think it might have been when he started using the cane, and his wife was like,
Oh,
whoa, that, and being really startled by it because I think she just hadn't fully come to grips with how it was evolving and continuing for him. So
Yeah, I do remember that too, Mary. That it was an interesting perspective of the family because, they were in a restaurant. It was a nice night out. He had gotten to use the cane the weekend before with a friend group, but he had never used it in front of his wife. And navigating a darkened restaurant with tables and people is kind of scary. And so he had decided he would bring out the cane. And she said, "You don't need that in here." And so he put it away. And he said that, that would be about a year that he would wait then to try again because he felt her shame more so than his shame.
yeah.
And so that interaction there was intriguing to me. But yes, that later she got to come to some of his medical appointments later, like way down the line, and just the way that she was brought into the new understanding, but also how he had his own understanding of blindness. I mean, that was I liked that sort of nuance between the two of them. And then just I don't anybody, if you get a chance to read it, the kiddo was so sweet. Like his
Yeah.
experience with his child was just lovely, and one of the other sections that was truly one of my favorites was towards the end of the book when he really has lost most of his sight and he is on the subway with his child. And he decides to put his arm around his child, which is just to keep him safe, but is also a practical element of being blind in a crowded space. You make a connection. And he said that, it is the difference between that functional component, but also a moment of love, and that they had finally figured out a way to navigate both being supportive of his disability, but also, the kiddo just put his head on his shoulders on his dad's chest. And so in doing that, it was both practical. They were getting through the subway, but it was also, a moment of love, just of kindness. And so it was neat. That was one of my favorite parts of the book. I just loved his kiddo, Oscar, such a cute kiddo.
I want to make sure that we talk a little bit because I don't remember in this book if there was really anything about a reading service like ours. There was stuff about what are they? It's called Talking Books.
Yeah.
And some other services. And then also the same thing was true in the Book of Vision, where there's no mention of, but doesn't every state have an audio reader-ish? Or mostly every state?
I just saw Martha doing a,
Yeah, Martha, go ahead.
so go ahead. Yeah.
Most states do, but I don't know where the author is from. Some states have multiple, like Illinois and Ohio have 5 or 6, but Kansas were the only one. I don't think Alabama has one. A couple of them are closing down, so it just kind of depends on where you are. It's
Yeah, it just surprised me that there wasn't that. And then the one
within us, they're all different funding models. Some are attached to libraries, some are attached to universities like us, some are freestanding nonprofits that are completely on their own. Some are through Lighthouse of the Blind. So it's a big variety. There's not a lot of consistency state to state.
Yeah.
Martha, you have a notebook with all the locations. Is that fairly up to date, as I recall
Here,
it?
I'll
State
post
by
a link
state.
to the International Association site. They have a find a service and it does list them by state.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah. A very minor thing. Oh, go ahead, whoever that was.
No, I was just gonna say they talked about like the readers at the school where they had the cave, and I can't remember the guy's name that was a big disability advocate. but I didn't, you're right, Mary, I didn't see a whole lot of discussion of it. They did talk about audiobooks and audio reading. There was fascinating components of the technology that was discussed too. But yeah, there wasn't as much information on like reading services. Although I do think that there was, it really helped me get some perspective around, and I think we even talked about this, about how some people think of it as the voice of the reader becomes the voice in your head. And so that when you think about the way you would read a book, if I was reading a book, I'm not dramatizing it in my head. It's my voice in my head reading to me, right? And that concept then of we often tell our readers, that's part of it. We don't want you to over dramatize, to make it sing songy, or to just like make it crazy emphasis that's just like out of the world. Instead, you want to be straightforward and read the information. And that allows the person that is listening, like in their brain, they can imagine it. They can put in whatever they want. That's how our brains work, right? So I found that to be encouraging in terms of one of the ways that we talk about training is truly to not be overly dramatic. And at least in one perspective, that works. Martha and Nick often speak about how our audio describers struggle with the fact that the people in the audience have a very wide range of what they want, and if for Nick and Martha, it really does have a great section on the history of audio description, and really intriguing. But one of the components of that was to say that one of the gentlemen that is an audio describer, the guy out of, I think, Audio Eyes, he was talking about if you ask a person that has limited sight, however, or if he could figure out what time period in their life they have lost their vision based on how they wanted something described. So if it was somebody that lost their sight early in life, they want it minimalistic. They don't want all this stuff about color and emotion and all that jazz. They want it minimalistic. But if it's somebody like the author of this book that lost their sight later in life, then yeah, the emotions and the facial expressions and the colors and all of that stuff, they want it maximized. They want everything they can. So just found those things to be intriguing.
I found that very helpful too. That's exactly where I was going. And another part of it is, I guess it also depends on what you're reading. I mean, if I'm reading a novel as opposed to the newspaper, the newspaper, I'm communicating information. But one thing that struck me was Braille.
Oh,
And
yeah.
to come on Braille, and I realized that's the one opportunity the blind person has, as you're saying, when we read, it is our own voice inside our head. And Braille is the way that allows the person who is totally blind to have that, to do that. I've seen the discussions back and forth over the utility of Braille in the modern world, but that just cinched it for me. And I think that, wow, yes, absolutely. That would be critical. I would want that. I would want to be able to have my own images as I'm reading something. And I guess you said, I don't hear my own voice. I don't read to myself in my head. I visualize as I read. I like that. And that's why sometimes the movie is such a disappointment. It's all wrong. It's totally wrong. Nothing looks like it's supposed to.
Definitely.
I'd like to tie that thought back for a moment to back at the very beginning of this discussion when Mary, you brought up the image of the front of the book, which I'll be honest, I've never looked that closely at the image at the front of the book. Remember, I audio read it. And the fact that the description of the book that's written in the back is so long, when the description could be, it's a book cover, The Country of the Blind, written by Andrew Leland, and the book cover has a variety of people standing in various poses. Done, right? When really the texture and the tone of that front cover is each of the different disabilities that you can see in each of the people on the cover of the book. And the only way you get that out is by describing each one in detail.
Right.
So do you just want to know it had a bunch of people on it, or do you want to know every detail about every person that was on the front? And how much time do you have?
Yeah, right. And are they in a circle around the outside edge, or are they front and center with the title below? You can
Mhm.
get, that is one of
That's
the
like
problems.
that's sort of the but we one of the I can't remember. He was talking about a personal reader. One of the professors had
Oh.
a professor that the author knew had a a basically like a hired reader that read all of his materials, and any correspondence he got, he would read it to him, and that this professor really wanted
Yeah.
to have all of his mail read to him, like his junk mail, everything, right? I don't know if y'all remember that section, but
Mhm.
and it was like, why, right? Why would you want that? But the point was is that he could make the choice. I mean, and so he could choose, yeah, it's like he gets to decide what's peripheral and what's not because he's read it all. He's had all of it read to him. So it's still that component of, independence, but also in interplay. Go ahead, Mary. I'm sorry.
Oh no, but this just raises in my mind my sometimes difficulty, especially when I was reading the Kansas City Star today. There were a lot of articles that were really relevant to Kansas City, and I had to pick the ones. I didn't have enough time to read all of it, and so it makes me feel sort of guilty that I'm trying not to editorialize by picking what I think would be useful, but I am. That is happening, and so I love that the guy wanted that everything read to him. In the book Vision, Judge Tatel also he has readers. He has readers that work for him. Of course, he's a judge, so he has to have whoa
Right.
all that stuff read to him. But anyway, yeah.
I agree with you on that, Mary. I feel that every time I read the Southeast Kansas newspapers once a week, I'm desperately trying not to editorialize, but I have to in the interest of time to
Yes.
some extent.
Yeah.
But I always feel better when I remember, we can remind people, remember, full reading is available on the Lions telephone reader network.
Yeah.
And encourage people to use that option in our offerings. That's one of the nice things we do. I don't know, Martha, how much we differ, but it seems to me we do really have a wide spectrum of things that we do. I, I think some of the other states, I suspect, is more limited. And I guess we picked up on the fact that for anybody, they immediately assume that if you talk about reading for people, they think books. That's the only thing that people associate with that in general, I think.
Yes, and I think that's especially interesting since now audiobooks are so prevalent and you can get practically anything in an audiobook, but you cannot get unless you use a screen reader, the newspaper.
Yeah. And again, that takes me back. I really felt better reading the comment about Braille, because the screen reader, you'd say, well, you don't need Braille. You got to get a screen, get that device. It may cost a few $1,000, but it scans it for you. I think you can get it, Martha. I don't remember if I remember right. You can now get something it's basically the size of a pen, and you just, as if you were underlining the text, it's reading it to you. Pretty
Yeah.
inexpensive. I think those are only a couple $100. So why would anyone want Braille? And the answer is, it allows you to do what we like to do when we read, have it in our own head.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Braille readers are so much more hireable and have longer employment or have more employment opportunities.
Yeah.
But it is also, I mean, I really enjoyed hearing the history of Braille because I really didn't know any of that, so that was just intriguing to me. And I didn't realize how hard it is. I mean, I guess I did, but that like for adult learners, it's just, I mean, incredibly hard. I like the analogy of, you read you saw a movie on the Greek classics and you decided that you wanted to go and learn Greek, and how hard that would be as an adult learner. And that it's even more so because it's not just learning in your brain a new language, it's feeling a new language, and that some of our fingers just, I mean, that's one of the things they say about as you grow older, you know, you have, it's like put on gloves and then you can understand how it is for an older person to pick up a coin. You know, I've had that done to me. But imagine that. I mean, your fingers really, they aren't as viable as a, you know, sensitive receptor because of the fact that it's just different. So amazing to me. And Braille is just wow. But I wanted to at least throw out one other thing about reading speeds because it was such a great visual. I've always wondered how our listeners can listen so quickly. You know, have that concept of they just listen at a speed so much higher than we do. And can understand it. And the guy was talking about, you know, the author was talking about, it was like the first time he was trying to do it, it was like a coked up C3PO. I just thought that was, first of all, hilarious. And then secondly, he talked about how the brain interacts with the visual concept of reading, and the auditory concept of reading is like this idea of you can drive through a forest and you can get all that information, but you can see that you're driving through a forest. You know, you experience the forest. But the other idea of slowing down that speed is more like walking through the forest or taking a jog through the forest. And I really like that analogy. It helped me understand sort of the concept of as you speed things up, and that he, as a person with limited sight, does choose his speed, you know. So if he's reading something that he really just wants to, you know, digest it, get it in there and understand it, he'll put it at that really high speed. But if not, he might slow it down so that he can have that concept of walking through the forest. So I thought that was neat too. Anyhow, we are getting to about 5 minutes. So if anybody wants to throw out any of their last thoughts that they're really want to share, Jane, and I want to make sure to just, Jane, I don't know if you had any other, if you had a chance to read it or if you had any other concepts to share too, but want to make sure folks have a chance to throw in any last thoughts.
I have not read the book. My first hint of it and how fascinating this would be was when I went back and read your email message. I am fascinated by the anticipation of reading both of these books that were mentioned. So the Country of the Blind, the author's last name is what? It's Andrew what?
Leland,
Leland, yeah.
Leland.
Okay. And then Just Ask, the author is?
Just Ask is a children's book that the Coterie play is based on. But there was something about the Judge book. What was that?
Yes, it's called Vision, and it's by Judge Tatel, and I can't remember his first name, but his last name is spelled Tatel. And he's a federal judge in DC, or was. He's retired.
Terrific. Well, I have really appreciated all your comments and the nuances of how we read and how it affects our listeners is something that I know we all need to be aware of. And, you know, we don't really have a way to assess who is in our audience and how would that affect the way that we read and how they can perceive it. And are we doing it as correctly as possible for the particular audience that we have? And we have no way to know that. So all of these thoughts about how we come across as readers are quite important and worth us thinking about our own styles and so forth. So I appreciate all of your comments. This is just fabulous. And I always have of course, too long book list. I want to get to this soon. I usually have 3 different books at least going on in my head, but it works well and I get through a lot of stuff. So these 2 are absolutely on my list. So thank you all for that.
Thank you, Jane. Definitely. And yes, thank you, Mary, for the suggestion, and
Yes.
appreciate that we all kind of jumped in on it. It's a good one. I would highly recommend it. And if nothing else, I think it's a good one for us to think about from volunteers' perspective too, just giving them some idea of the world that we're entering, right? And to Nick and Martha's point, I this was the first time I really understood the 1996 Chafee Amendment, which allows us to read things that are copyrighted because of it's an accessibility thing. And it spoke to that too. So I was like, oh, that's that amendment that they talked about. So yeah, learned a lot through it. Anyhow, did anyone else have any comments they wanted to share?
I just have one other thing, which is that I read it because my book club read it, and it wasn't something that I picked off the shelf. I don't think I would have ever read it. I mean, I just didn't. Wouldn't have crossed my path.
Mm-hmm.
One of the people in my book club, her father was blind, had gone blind late in his life, and she said she picked it up, she started to read it, she started to sob, closed it, had nightmares all night,
Oh,
and wouldn't read it, the rest of it, which I thought was very, I really wished she had persevered, because ultimately it was a pretty optimistic book, even though, it was difficult and hard for him, but it was, he made lemonade.
yeah,
So,
Yeah, you mean he made a pretty good selling book.
that too. Yeah.
But yeah, it could have been called Community of the Blind almost as well, I thought.
then you wouldn't have that, there's that, the
They
reason
use
it's
that
called
image.
Country of the Blind, in the country of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, is the little proverb.
And there was really bad cartoon in today's paper that I won't go into on one-eyedness. So, but I guess I came away thinking probably, we're worried about our audience. At first, I started to worry, and I thought, well, no, that's a very diverse group of people. We're never going to please everyone. So, and maybe the fact is that we all have different voices and we all have different styles. That might actually be a real positive for listeners. No, oh, I know Mary. She's, I really like, the way she says things, and, you know, so I think we ought to be, on the other hand, just maybe attentive and trying to do the best we can, but also not worry about it so much. Just try to be friends with our friends who are on the other end there.
I think that for me that it's a celebration of resilience.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
the obstacles that just humans face every day, whether it's blindness or anything, we all have them, right? We all have them, and it's the endeavor of humanity, right? To live this life and to find your happiness and overcome those obstacles in whatever way you can. And I think that resilience is just a glorious thing. It's a book worth celebrating, I think.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things I've said to a few people, having now had the wonderful chance to be part of Audio Reader, I no longer have a fear of going through that process myself, which may happen with age. I've decided, well, gosh, it can be a great world. It's a very full, rich, exciting world, or it's a neat country to be part of. And if you end up there, it's not. I don't even want to say it's not so bad. It's actually adventure. There are lots of adventures.
It'll be okay.
Yeah, it'll be okay. Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's a great note. Let's celebrate all of our wonderful diversity and our wonderful resilience. I'm grateful for all of you to take your time to share with us today, and really enjoyed it. So thanks, everyone. I hope you have a good rest of your afternoon, and maybe we'll get some warmth. I know next week it's going to be like in the 50s, so we can celebrate that too.
Stay warm, everybody.
I was out
Thanks,
shoveling
everyone.
I was out shoveling right before the call. It's a beautiful day. It is a beautiful day.
Only you, Jim.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Bye-bye.
Thanks all.
Thanks,
Everybody.
everybody.
See ya.
Bye.